I'm Julia from Family, and we're here at Nursery World 2023. I'm lucky enough to be joined by Imogen Edmonds, who's the CEO of Red Wing Solutions, and she's here to answer some questions about HR and all the business of being an early years setting. So thank you so much, Imogen, for coming.
You're more than welcome.
I'd love to start by asking you a little bit about what are settings reaching out for help for at the moment?
Well, there are a few common themes to the calls that we receive, much of them around staff absenteeism and issues to do with perhaps ad hoc absences, staff calling in on a morning and saying they're not going to be in today, they're not feeling 100%, they haven't haven't recovered as quickly from a cold or a cough or some of these nasty viruses that go around at winter as quickly as they thought, or that their child's unwell and they're unable to attend work because they've got caring responsibilities. We also have people who are calling up because staff are long-term sick and they need some advice and guidance on how to manage that. They want to be a good employer, but they're worried about the consequences of them remaining off sick and not returning to work. We are in a recruitment crisis, and so when anyone's off, it causes a big problem.
I think that's a really key point, because we want to be good leaders, we want to be good managers, and we want to look after our team, but we're also running a business, and trying to balance those two things can be difficult, I think. Is that what you're seeing from leaders?
I am. I mean, the vast majority of people who run childcare settings are heart-centred. They want to do the right thing. They don't set out to run a business to not look after the people they serve and the people they work with. But what can happen along the way is that it can become increasingly difficult, and decisions have to be taken, challenging conversations have to be had. And if you haven't got access to HR, the idea of speaking to somebody, and we've all heard the phrase, I was fearful of saying the wrong thing. It really stops people in their tracks. And so what they need is someone who's going to say, you're absolutely reasonable to sit down and explore with your member of staff what it is that's concerning you. Try and find a solution. It's absolutely fair that you sit down and explain the consequences of your lateness or your absenteeism on the team. Because unless somebody's had that conversation, it wouldn't be fair later down the road to say to them, well, we need to speak formally. But one of the questions myself and my consultants always say to somebody is, you're ringing up to talk to us today. Have you already spoken to your employee? Because if you want to talk to your employee formally, you're in the right place. We are here to show you what a fair process is. But in the majority of cases, you need to have spoken to them informally first. Somebody won't know that them walking in through the door at 8 o'clock with the parents is a problem unless you've told them that you need them to be at work, ready to start work at 8 o'clock. And what that means and the consequences of that need to be spelt out to people and understood by people. We should never assume.
I think it's a really, really fair point, because so often as managers or leaders, we might not have kind of gone through that process first, because often when we're faced with a problem, especially if, like you say, it's maybe a single site setting, they don't have an HR function, and they immediately think, oh my gosh, what do I do? In those scenarios, for those managers, where can they find support for those difficult conversations? Where can they go?
You'd like to think that when they do their management training, when they've, currently you only have to be a level 3 to be a manager, but you'd like to think people have had access to management training and been able to be given guidance on how to have conversations in the workplace, how to manage absenteeism, how to handle flexible working requests. But in reality, the vast majority of people get their information from Google, the same place that the employees get their information. And if they were to ring ACAS, which is a fabulous resource available freely, when they eventually get through to somebody, the advice could be very different based on the questions they've asked. So they need to have access to a reliable source. And we find people fall into two categories. They'll either speak to people and have access to people that are like them. And that's so useful, having a good network, having cluster meetings and local network meetings where you can speak to other owners who've been in the same situation. Because if you're thinking, say, of buying a nursery and you haven't spoke to somebody who has already bought a nursery, you might not realise the sort of things that you need to be considering. Whereas if you can find a friend, if you like, that will give you good advice and say, oh, you need to speak to a solicitor, you'll need to think about this, you'll need to think about TUPE because there are rules around staff transfer, then you might find yourself making a mistake. And if you go onto Google, you can be overwhelmed with the information available to you. But HR consultants, wherever they are in the UK, provide employers that sort of reasonable access to information. And there's blogs and articles you'll find on our website and others that do our work, podcasts and all sorts of ways in which you can access the information so that you can educate yourself as a manager. So when something comes up that you don't know about, you can find the way to solve it.
I think that's really good advice. And I think something you said there about knowing the right questions to ask, I think
so important.
It really is, because like you say, so often we might know we have a problem, but kind of drilling down to the real crux of it and therefore getting the right answers to the problem can be half the battle. If we don't ask the right questions or look in the right places or trust the right sources, we might not be going in the right direction. So I think that's really, really key.
I mean, let's take a common one. Do I have to pay somebody that doesn't come to work because their child is ill? Well, there could be a multiple way in which you could answer that question. And I'm not saying people set out to give bad answers, but if you ask a bad question, there is always the potential you will get a bad answer. And this is the risk because, largely, it sounds awful, but we have a common thing in our responses. What does the contract say? And if the contract says you get paid for time off for your children, then that's what the employer must do because the contractor said you will do that. But in many situations, the contract is silent on this. So there is nothing in the contract to say whether you'll be paid if your child is ill. So then it defaults to what does the law say will happen in that situation. And so people do need to understand the documents they've issued themselves. You can't just issue a template, pop your name on it and say, there you go. You need to make sure you've had good advice to draw up those contracts in the first place and then know and understand those contracts so that you can apply them fairly and legally with your team. And asking questions is the start of it.
You touched on something there as well about, using a template, or you can buy kind of packs online of pre-written procedures and things like that. Would you advise settings do that? Is there a better way?
I think it's better than what some people do, which is to take their own personal terms and conditions when they last had a paid job and to take their name out and their salary out and their place of work and pop in the name and address details of where they now work. That's probably the worst thing anyone could ever do, because nobody knows that when you were giving them they were good, let alone the fact that you're now then giving it to someone else on your own behalf. So yes, a template can be absolutely fine, but what you've got to do is make sure it's a template written for an early years employer, and we can't stress that enough, because there's no point just having a standard contract that all that made it early years was that somebody dropped the word nursery in it. That's not going to be what you are going to want as that employer, as that manager. You're going to want something a bit more bespoke.
So you spoke about having a conversation with staff before necessarily taking it down a more formal route. Say you're that setting manager and you've got a member of staff who's maybe, you don't need to do a formal disciplinary or anything yet, but yes, seeing that maybe some things need to be chatted about. What's your advice for that manager who's sitting there in the morning thinking, oh my gosh, I've got to talk to this employee later?
Yeah, really, really good question. And I would always sort of refer that manager back to the fact that they are a manager today. Now, they are a manager today because somebody in the past set them back on the tracks. And I would put myself in the same situation. At some point in my career, somebody said to me, Imogen, you want to stop doing that? Imogen, you want to start doing this? And if nobody does that, if our managers don't do that for us, then in the future, we will never be able to manage other people, because we can all be capable of getting it wrong. So the manager who calls up and says, oh, I don't really want to have this conversation, we go, well, that unfortunately is part of being a manager. It can't always be about patting people on the back and telling them they've done a fantastic job. Sometimes we have to say to them, you need to start this or you need to stop that. And it's our job to do that as effectively as possible. I tell the story about how I had a boss once who was so vague in his conversations that one chap came out of a meeting and felt that he'd been promoted rather than disciplined. So you have to be so clear in what you're saying to somebody. So if you want them to stop doing X, you need to label it as stop doing X. And don't try and butter it up with lots of nice words about what a wonderful person you are, because they might only hear that part of the conversation and not the bit about please stop doing X. So we would always encourage managers to just do it. Be kind, be fair, don't be unreasonable, don't say to somebody you're going to get into really big trouble if I have to speak to you again, because all of that stuff's very subjective and threatening. Just be fair to somebody and say, I need to tell you this, I need to see an improvement in this, I need you to stop this or start this. And we don't want to talk to you formally, but if you don't start this or stop this, you'll leave us no choice. That's where we'll be. So please, if you need any help or assistance, let me know and I will give that to you. And people then like the structure of that, and do you know what? They go and do it.
I think also that's really, one, it's really clear, but I think the other thing that I think is really valuable there is talking about that shift in an idea, because as I've been a manager of people before, and I hated having to correct or to speak to someone about anything, because it's unpleasant. But to reframe it as that way of thinking, well, actually, you're not, telling someone off, you're not being mean, you're allowing them to get better, you're allowing them to grow in a different direction. And I think that's a lovely way to reframe that responsibility.
And I think it's so true, because, we are coaches when we're managers. We are, championing people from the sidelines. We might not be waving bananas in their faces at half time and oranges and saying, here, have one of these. But we are coaches and we are there to delegate. And if you look at the definition of delegation, it's all about passing on responsibility. That's why we call somebody who goes on a course a delegate, because they've got the responsibility to go and learn. Well, if you expand your practice to being, all I'm doing is training, all I'm doing is coaching. Yes, some days I'll be saying to somebody, do more of this, it's fantastic. And other days I'll be saying, do less of this, it's not fantastic. But that's part of management, and it's something we shouldn't fear. Having a conversation with somebody isn't something we should be fearful of. It should be something we embrace. And I always say, when staff or employees behave in a way that makes you want to go away, I don't want to deal with you, that's exactly when you need to pull them close and have those conversations, because you pushing them away isn't going to make it any better. Bringing them close at least gives you a chance of improving what it is that's concerning you or resolving what the issue is.
I think that's lovely advice. Especially about bringing people in, because as educators, that's what we do with the children. We know that we don't exclude children anymore when they do things that are not what we want. We bring them in and talk to them and explain what we do want. So it's a natural thing for educators to do, and we can do that as leaders too.
Absolutely. I mean, people have a lot of people who are apprentices and trainees, and that's wonderful. And the sector has been made out of the idea that we advance our knowledge through education. But you can't expect somebody to walk into a nursery setting on their day one and know everything. You've got to be prepared to be in it for the long run, which will mean perhaps even explaining to them how to work, how not to nod off after 2:00 in the afternoon, how to, come to work every day, and not only days that your boyfriend doesn't want to take you shopping. All of these things that you think might be common knowledge, you might have to share with them. And the investment that you make in people's development by sitting down and talking to them is always repaid to you. And the other thing I would say is, too often people think that the probationary period, you can remain silent for 6 months and then say the night before the 6 months is up, see ya. We don't want to work with you anymore. And if you haven't spoken to them in the 6 months about your concerns, what are they going to say? Nobody ever said to me that there was a problem with my timekeeping. No one ever said to me there was a problem with my attendance. And now I've lost my position. They'll go down the road, and the first thing they'll say is something negative about the experience working in your setting. And settings don't need that.
No. Something else you mentioned there was delegation. And I think especially as those managers I was talking about, the single site managers who feel like they have to do absolutely everything, I think delegation is somewhere that they could really use a bit of guidance. Again, if you're that manager doing absolutely everything and you are desperate to get some time back or to delegate some tasks, what would your advice be to those managers to kind of get that ball rolling?
Yeah, I have got some advice to give on that. Delegate on the days that you perhaps don't need to delegate. because your future self will thank you. Because if you're say a manager of a setting and you've got a deputy, and maybe the deputy's room based and you're office based, in an ideal world, it might not be the reality right now, but in an ideal situation, that deputy, if they're going to step into your shoes when you're on your 2-week summer holiday, if you're not going to be disturbed whilst you're on the beach, maybe the good idea would be to bring that deputy into, come and have a look at this, I'm going to be doing so and so today, come and have a look at it whilst I do it now, let's then next time do it together, and then when the time comes that you're doing it on your own, you'll be sweet. So delegate when you don't need to delegate would be my advice to that manager. So don't wait until you've got a million things to do and you just want to farm out a job to somebody. Delegate when you can truly delegate and do it properly.
That's excellent advice, isn't it? Because then if you're not under a time pressure because you have to go and do something else, and so you have to call your deputy and do this quickly, I've got to go. Well, they're going to immediately be lost, aren't they? Because they haven't been shown.
That's when we end up with feelings afterwards of, I should have done it myself. Because guess what? It wasn't done the way I expected it to be done. Well, again, we make assumptions, don't we? Because they have been aware that we do it, they will know how we did it. They're not necessarily the same thing. And I mean, I'm as guilty as that as the next manager. We all have made mistakes and thought, oh, did they not realise that we do this? But you have to think about the bigger picture. Who is going to do these jobs? Am I the best person to do these jobs? I mean, if you're an introvert and one of the things you're asked to do is to show potential parents around your setting and you hate it, the best person to do that might be the extrovert on your team that absolutely loves showing off the setting to prospective parents. So rather than do something that you find difficult, find someone else for whom you can delegate it to, who finds it easy and loves it and will be on a high after they've done it. Rather than you, who will be thinking, I need to go and lie down in the office now and recover, because that really pushed me out of my comfort zone. I mean, it's not true that every job a nursery manager does can be delegated. We're always going to be accountable. The buck will literally stop with us. But there will be things that you don't need to do that you could give to someone else to have responsibility for. And as I say, my advice is think about that, give that some thought. Because it's succession planning in HR terms, that's the fancy word for it. But you're always better off having given thought to succession planning than perhaps seeing somebody good go down the road and work somewhere else because you never gave them the opportunity to grow. And I go back to it, we're here today because someone gave us the opportunity to grow.
I think it's excellent advice as well. And again, it's that mindset shift from just thinking, oh, I've got to get someone else to do this, but actually, where can they really grow? Where can I find that strength in my team? With the example you gave of someone who loves doing show rounds versus someone who doesn't enjoy it, that's great for that person. They're getting an opportunity to do something they enjoy and learn how to do it. It seems so obvious, right? Although we find it in practice quite hard to do.
And it can come from the top, because if you've been tasked to make sure that happens, do this, do that, and you've had bad experience in the past with asking someone to do something and perhaps it got forgotten about, or it was done but it wasn't done correctly, or it was done but it wasn't done to the right standard, you can be anxious about letting go again. But you need to do it because there is always going to be not enough time. There is always going to be more jobs to be done than you've the time available. And we shouldn't be doing the tasks that we don't add value to. I always smile when we speak to owners and they're washing up. They're the owner of the small business. They are doing something that needs doing, but was it something that they needed to be doing? Because they can't really concentrate on the HR advice they're being given if they've got their hands in the washing up bowl.
I guess moving on from that, speaking about the jobs that the managers really need to do themselves, that's often the more financial side of things. It might be taking advantage of marketing or learning more about boosting their occupancy. Those are often things that are unique to the manager's role. But if you are a new manager, where do you start learning about those really business or finance focused things?
Well, the first thing you need to do is make sure that whoever it is who pays your wages has given you some guidance of what it is they want you to do. And sometimes, again, you have to go back and say, will you give me a bit more detail? Can we just clarify this a little bit more? Because it might be that your owner wants you to do marketing on a budget. And if they don't tell you what that budget is, you could easily overspend that budget. So you need to be specific with people, and they'll thank you for it. They won't necessarily thank you for it when you put them on the spot, but they'll thank you for it in the long term, that you were conscientious enough to ask the question. But there can be so many ways in which you can market on a budget. Good example. So if you were a nursery manager and you were asked to do some marketing, you might think of, well, will my staff share posts that I do on social media? Can I ask my staff, who is it that likes TikTok? Who will do some brand awareness for us on TikTok? And there could be a staff member, or there could be a family member of a staff member that absolutely loves social and will do that for the nursery for free, just for the experience, just for the back catalogue that they collect. And yet asking people is free. Asking people doesn't show weakness. Asking people shows common sense. And you really would want to start there, and you would want to start looking at what other people can do to help you. Asking for help. Does anyone got any ideas of low cost effective ways to do this? Has anybody got any good ways of how to calculate ratios? Has anyone got any good ways to do budgets and management accounts? And people will help you if they can. They might not help you if they're in the same postcode as you, but they'll help you if they can. And I think too many people are fearful of asking, not because, like we said earlier, that they might fear of saying something wrong, but they could come across as silly. And we need to get over that. If we're going to be managers, we need to not fear sounding silly, because no question asked is a silly question. The silly questions are the ones you don't actually ask.
Something else I wanted to ask is you've spoken about reaching out and asking, and we talked a little bit about looking at templates perhaps for contracts or for policies, but there's an awful lot of advice out there. So especially as a new manager and you want to look for advice about billing people, or you want to look for advice about your setting or HR problems, and you're looking at Google, where on earth do you start?
Well, the key thing is with Google, it depends on the words you put in. So if you have a question about the national minimum wage and your day nursery, my advice would be put in national minimum wage and day nursery, because then the chances are that the searches that come back will be articles written by people who understand day nurseries and understand the national minimum wage. Because sadly, when we do our HR qualifications, we're trained to be generalists. We're trained to do HR in the corner shop or in the multinational. It's all the same. But it isn't all the same. In early years, you have to understand early years. If you don't understand safeguarding, for example, the advice you could give to an employer could be completely wrong. And we joke about it, but when the situation comes through and someone says, oh, I called my advisor and I told them that we'd lost little Fred for 3 minutes in the garden and we didn't know what to do, and the advisor told us, well, have you found Fred? Well, yes. Well, then what's the problem? What are you ringing me for? Well, that advisor doesn't appreciate that losing Fred for 3 minutes was a safeguarding concern. And the beauty of coming to speak to a HR consultant that specialises in early years is you get people who understand that's a safeguarding concern and aren't going to tell you, what are you ringing us for? What's the problem? He was found. He's safe. He's back playing with the stick of bricks. There is no issue. Yeah. So it's so important to get advice that is targeted to early year settings. If you want the best answer, go to the people who can give you the best answer, and don't just accept the first response you receive back when you Google the word national minimum wage. Google the word early years or day nursery and you'll get a much better response from Google.
I think that's really, really excellent advice, because again, we're a sector that's hard pressed financially, and we're hard pressed for time. So it's much easier to just Google, what do I do with this? And like you say, if you're not making that specific to an early years situation or a day nursery or a childcare situation, you do run the risk of not getting the right advice.
You're going to find the answer you want, because the algorithm is going to throw you back the pages that have the answer you want, rather than something that could send you down a rabbit hole of thinking you're okay to do something because the answer wasn't specific enough to the sector that you're in. So my advice would be, if you've got no money and no time, use Google, but ask the question carefully. And if you are in a position to access paid support, then again, make sure your advisors understand early years and ask them questions. Again, it's not just about how much is it going to cost, but how much do you know about early years? How many day nurseries do you look after now? Will you have capacity to look after me? When I ring you, will someone answer the phone? Or will it be a call centre? Because you're a one-person operation, and when you're not there, there's no one to answer the phone. Asking these questions doesn't make you appear rude, it makes you appear sensible. And I know I keep coming back to that, but that is the essence of the advice we would give to new managers. Ask those questions.
And I think it is excellent advice as well, because you don't ask questions, you're not going to find out. But like you say, it's important to do it in the right way, to the right people.
Smart way.
Exactly. It's been brilliant talking to you, Imogen. Thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you.
Thank you.